Tonight, I'm going in-depth on something that could impact us all here in Green Country. The U.S. Postal Service is looking at closing its mail processing center in East Tulsa and moving operations to Oklahoma City. A change of address, if you will. The Tulsa Center is where all mail for eastern Oklahoma and even northwest Arkansas is sorted. The Postal Service is no longer taking public comments about this, but I learned lawmakers are still keeping up the fight over your mail in Tulsa on Capitol Hill. The time for you to speak up about the future of the U.S. Postal Service Processing Center in East Tulsa is over. But the people you've elected to speak for you in federal and local governments say their work is just getting started on this.
It's not a done deal, but for them, they think it's a economical move for them, for the United States Postal Service. We're obviously pushing against it.
Oklahoma U.S. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen describes talks in Washington as a literal fight, and we're not even close to the main event yet. The main event is when the U.S. Postal Service releases its 10-year plan, which is expected to make major cuts nationwide in an effort to stop the agency from losing billions.
I don't go into any fight thinking I'm going to lose. It's not over till someone's hand gets raised, right?
Tulsa Congressman Kevin Hearn wrote a letter to Postmaster General Louis DeJoy saying the presentation given in Tulsa on March 8th had problems in its explanation. Hearn says adding trips up and down the turnpike adds delivery time, and the USPS has not explained how processing all mail in Oklahoma City keeps delivery times the same in Tulsa.
It could have a terrible economic impact on Tulsans. It could have a terrible health impact on Tulsans, and obviously we want our postal service to run efficiently and smoothly.
Tulsa City Councilors started working on a resolution last month to send to the Postal Service, saying the closure will do more harm than good. They could take a formal vote as early as next week, and that resolution would not only be the city's official position, it would go to the USPS as well. The U.S. Postal Service is broke, and this is why communities like ours are facing changes in service, even total closures of centers. Last year, the USPS reported first-class mail usage is at its lowest point since 1968. The Postal Service reported last November a $6.5 billion with a B dollar operating loss. In addition to raising the price of stamps, the Postal Service is looking to cut its transportation costs by $1 billion this year. We first learned about the possible closure of the Tulsa Processing Center at a community meeting in early March. Dozens of people packed into the Hardesty Regional Library in South Tulsa on March 8th to express their concerns about the center's closure and the delays it could cause to local mail delivery. We spoke to the branch president of the Mail Handling Union, who thinks the change probably isn't the smartest move.
I was listening at the people talk about the medication coming late, the checks going late. My mother is a senior citizen, and she mailed something in December that just got there after February, okay? And we're in March now. It's not a good feeling. It's just not a good feeling.
The Postal Service stopped collecting public comments on its 10-year plan on March 22nd. It's now in the hands of law and policymakers in Washington, D.C., so let's hear from one of those lawmakers now. Joining me now, unedited in his own words, is Congressman Kevin Hearn. We're talking about the United States Postal Service Processing Center. I know you wrote a letter. Are you concerned about this closure?
I am. I think the federal government, all government, it's the government of the people, should be transparent with the people that actually pays its way, and the taxpayers need to know what's going on. I think when you see what's happening, they have the right to know what was said was it wouldn't delay the mail. It's hard to believe that you can, ship a package or a letter 200 miles basically round trip and nothing be delayed. So we've sent a letter to the Postal Service asking for clarity on that.
When do you think we could have a decision? Because public comment had ended, I think, last week.
Well, that's public comment for the public, right?
Yeah.
Members of Congress, we have direct jurisdiction over that. So we're, when we look at what's going on there, we've got a sort of a semi-response back, but we're not really satisfied with what we heard. And so we're parsing through that right now to see an additional letter that's going to come forth. But this is a concern across the country. When we understand that the Postal Service is losing billions of dollars, and certainly looking at ways to save the Postal Service, if you will, without continuing to borrow a lot of money. But getting rid of service is certainly not a solution.
I know we talk about the federal government overstepping its bounds, but this is one of the federal government agencies that we send you all to Washington to work out. I know you don't like earmarks, but Do you think an earmark is needed to save this thing?
Well, you don't need an earmark on something that's already in the budget. I mean, this is part of the federal government's actual funding. Now, the problem is because of earmarks, we fund things that we shouldn't be funding, right? And because of that, we don't have the money necessarily to always do the right thing for the American people. And because we're $35 trillion in debt, sometimes things get overlooked. And the federal government has overlooked the Postal Service for a number of years now. And there's also a changing, right? I mean, when you look at text messaging and email and social media sites, a lot of communication today is done through those sites or those processes, which is taken away from first class mail, which is where all the money is. And now the Postal Service is contracting with all the big shippers to do that last mile delivery. So they need to sort of have a morphosis also of what they're going to do and how they're going to be relevant in the future.
And you kind of touched on it. This agency is losing money. Is this how they're going to try to save? Or I imagine we're not the only community dealing with this.
No, this is happening across the United States. The Postmaster General is a gentleman by the last name of DeJoy, and he spent 35 years in the logistics business, a very well-known logistics firm. And one of the contracts he had was with the Postal Service. Long hauls across the United States, and he was brought in under President Trump to basically save and stop the bleeding in the Postal Service. And he was also retained by President Biden. So, he has the favor of the two bosses that he's worked for, but that doesn't mean they don't, they shouldn't answer and be transparent with what they're doing to the people that they serve, which are our citizens here in the 1st District of Oklahoma.
I've got to ask you, while you're here, there is a motion to vacate again. Do you think that's going to go anywhere? And would you be interested in being Speaker again?
Well, certainly on the last part of your question, absolutely. If that's what happens and the members there and the constituents here in the 1st District want me to serve as, an opportunity to look at Speaker, that's fine. But the first step of that is the motion to vacate. And, who knows? Certainly the Congresswoman from Georgia put down a marker, if you will, saying that if certain things were done, namely funding Ukraine cleanly, that would be a problem for her. Now, whether she has the necessary votes to get that, as it happened to Speaker McCarthy back in October, whether that's going to take place or not, I don't know. I can tell you this, I know Speaker Johnson very well, and he is under a lot of stress right now to figure out the path forward for the rest of this time until September 30th and on into the election.
I was going to say, we are in an election year. Is anything really going to get done between now and November?
Well, certainly what we're seeing is a lot of these are going to be done through what's known as suspension, which takes 2/3 of the Congress. And so that's going to take a lot of bipartisan work. There will be not anything done as it relates to any conservative policies going forward. But we have still FISA to deal with and how we deal with foreign adversaries that are trying to do things to us, as we saw in 9/11. That's very critical that we know who's trying to harm us, especially when we have millions of people pouring across the southern border that are coming from places like Western Africa and the Middle East and China. That's a problem, and we need to know where they're coming from. The other side of that is we need to make sure American citizens are protected against warrantless searches. That's protected by the Constitution, as you alluded to. That's another thing we should be looking at. So that's something to deal with. And then we cannot forget what we just passed in the minibus, the appropriation cycle, was not for the upcoming year. That's for the year we're in. So we still have the entire appropriations process to do for the upcoming fiscal year, which starts October 1st.
Congressman Hearn, thank you so much for joining us today.